Welcome to accompaniment training for Minnesota Reading Corps, Math Corps, Opportunity Corps, and Recovery Corps members. I'm Amy Cash-Vanek, a program manager for Minnesota Reading Corps and Math Corps, and I'll be leading you through this brief 15-minute training. You may be wondering, what does accompaniment mean and how will this affect me? Don't worry, we will cover all of your questions today during this 15-minute training. What is accompaniment? You received an email the Friday before you started service notifying you that you are currently serving on accompaniment. Accompaniment is a higher level of supervision. It means that a member with background checks pending can still work with vulnerable populations, but while doing so, must be in the physical presence of another individual whose background checks have been cleared. Accompaniment is all about the safety of the children and participants our programs serve, and your safety as well. Vulnerable populations include children age 17 and younger, persons age 60 and older, and individuals with disabilities. You will need to be accompanied when you are directly serving a vulnerable population at your service site. For tutors, this applies to the students you will work with. For navigators, this applies to the participants. How does accompaniment affect you? Until we receive the results of your background check, you will be serving on accompaniment. While you are working with vulnerable populations, you must be in the physical presence of an adult whose background checks are cleared. You might be wondering, did I do something wrong? No, you did not do anything wrong, and being on accompaniment does not mean that there is any concern with your background check. This is simply a timing issue. There are only 2 people at the state office who run background checks for the entire state of Minnesota. Background checks cannot always be processed from the time members are fingerprinted to the time they start service. Accompaniment allows members with pending background checks to start service before the checks are cleared. Next, we'll talk about what your action steps are. Your first action step is to make a plan. You will work as a team with your site supervisor or internal coach and the staff members at your school to figure out a plan for who will be accompanying you throughout the day when you are serving students or participants. Your site supervisor or internal coach has been notified via email that you were placed on accompaniment, and they have been trained in this as well. They are aware it is part of their role to support you with creating an accompaniment plan. They might not be the person who does the actual accompanying, but they will know who could be. So who can accompany you? Accompaniment can be performed by your site supervisor or internal coach or another site staff member. Accompaniment can even be performed by other members as long as all check components required for access to vulnerable populations have cleared for the individual performing accompaniment. Here are some examples of what it can look like to be accompanied at your service site if you are a Reading Corps or Math Corps tutor. You can tutor at a desk in the hallway, outside of a classroom with an open door, and the teacher in that classroom can be accompanying you. You can tutor in the library, and the librarian can accompany you. Or you could share a space with another member at your site whose background check is cleared. Here are some examples of what it can look like to be accompanied at your service site if you are a navigator. You could be meeting with a participant in a cubicle, and your supervisor or another site staff could be within eyesight and earshot. Or you could be facilitating a group session in a conference room and keep the conference door open. Please note, accompaniment is also the responsibility of your site supervisor or internal coach and your service site to ensure the safety of everyone. Please ensure that you understand the responsibility for accompaniment and are upholding the requirements while at your service site. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Your second action step is to document. It is good practice to keep track of accompaniment information on paper throughout the day. You might have multiple people accompanying you throughout the day at different times. You will also need to document specific accompaniment information on your timesheets in Encore. There is a specific box at the bottom of your timesheet where you will enter your accompaniment information for each pay period. When you log into Encore to complete your timesheet, you will see two text boxes at the bottom of your timesheet. You will enter your accompaniment information in the top box. The wording above the box says, "Accompaniment is required. Please note the days, times, and full names of the individuals who accompanied you." You will not be able to submit your timesheet unless this box is filled in. Once all of your background check results have cleared and you are no longer serving on accompaniment, the accompaniment text box will no longer appear on your timesheets. Here is an example of a completed accompaniment text box on a timesheet in Encore. To review, the documentation that you should include in this box are the dates of accompaniment, the times of accompaniment, and the first and last names of any individuals who provided the accompaniment. If you did not have access to vulnerable populations but served hours at your site, you must list the activity for those dates and that you did not have access to vulnerable populations during that time. If you served hours that were not at your service site, you must list the date and time that accompaniment was not needed as you were not at your site. If you are serving vulnerable populations at another organization, you do not need to be accompanied per our program's guidelines. When you are serving at an outside organization, you will follow the policies of that organization. AmeriCorps regulations require accompaniment and documentation only when vulnerable populations are served at the designated service site. It is important to note that the hours recorded on your timesheet must match your accompaniment documentation. For example, if you have 9 hours listed on a certain day, it would not be sufficient to write 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. as the times for your accompaniment documentation, because that only accounts for 8 hours when you have 9 hours listed for that day on your timesheet. You could, however, write 8:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., 12:30 to 1:30 p.m., and 1:30 to 5:30 p.m., so long as the accompaniment documentation accounts for all of the hours served on a given day. Let's look at some more examples. Example number 1. I was accompanied September 8th through the 12th from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. by Elizabeth Bennett. For this example, the member had access to vulnerable populations. As such, they documented that they were accompanied September 8th to the 12th from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. by Elizabeth Bennett. This example has the dates, times, and first and last name of the person accompanying. This example assumes that the same person was providing accompaniment every day for the entire week. Example 2. I was accompanied September 8th from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. by Elizabeth Bennett. I was accompanied September 9th through the 12th from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. by Jane Eyre. Sometimes it is not possible for the same person to accompany you each day. In this example, the member documented that they were accompanied one day by Elizabeth Bennett and the rest of the week by Jane Eyre. This example has the dates, times, and first and last name of each person who accompanied the member. If this is what was in the accompaniment text box at the bottom of a member's timesheet, that member should have 8.5 hours listed on their timesheet every day from September 8th through the 12th. Example 3. I was accompanied on September 9th from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. by Jane Eyre and from 12 to 4 p.m. by Elizabeth Bennett. This example shows how to document if more than one person accompanied you within the same day. Example 4. On August 22nd, from 12 to 4 p.m., I was not at the service site. I did not need accompaniment. For this example, the member served hours that were not at their service site and therefore did not need to be accompanied. Please note, even if you did not need accompaniment for a certain activity, your accompaniment documentation must still account for all hours served. Example 5. I was accompanied on Tuesday, October 4th from 8 to 11 a.m. and 12 to 3 p.m. by Megan McNabb. From 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. and 3 to 5 p.m., I did not have access to vulnerable populations. This member would have recorded 9 hours on their timesheet for October 4th. Their accompaniment documentation accounts for all of those hours, even though they did not require accompaniment for all of them. So, what do you do if you forgot or if you didn't document accompaniment information correctly? It's okay. Don't panic. We are here to help. We will be checking to make sure that accompaniment information is included on your timesheets and documented correctly. Timesheets will be unlocked in the absence of proper documentation. If this happens, you will be notified via email. You will receive notes about what changes need to be made. Make the necessary changes and resubmit the timesheet as soon as possible. If you have any questions about what is needed or how to correct the documentation, don't hesitate to contact your program manager. We're happy to help. Your living stipend will be delayed if the timesheet is not submitted and approved with correct documentation by the timesheet deadline. We will be checking to make sure that accompaniment information is included on your timesheets and documented correctly. Timesheets will be unlocked in the absence of proper documentation. If this happens, you will be notified via email. You will receive notes about what changes need to be made. Make the necessary changes and resubmit the timesheet as soon as possible. If you have any questions about what is needed or how to correct the documentation, don't hesitate to contact your program manager. We're happy to help. Your living stipend will be delayed if the timesheet is not submitted and approved with correct documentation by the timesheet deadline. Because of this process, and to ensure corrections are made and your timesheet is approved before the deadline, follow these best practices. Submit your timesheet on the Monday following the end of the pay period. The living allowance schedule in your AmeriCorps program manual shows each date timesheets are due. This will give our staff 1 week before the deadline to check your timesheet and support you in making any necessary corrections. Your timesheet must have correct documentation, be submitted and approved before the Friday following the end of a pay period. For example, if the pay period starts on August 20th and ends on September 2nd, pay periods always start on Sunday and end on Saturday, 2 weeks in length. Your timesheet will be due on September 4th. Your internal coach will need to approve it by 5 p.m. on Friday, September 8th. This is the final deadline for timesheets. Therefore, it's best for you to complete and submit your timesheet by September 4th, allowing 4 days for corrections, resubmission, and approval to happen before the final deadline. If you submit your timesheet, for example, on Thursday, September 7th, there is only 1 day for our staff to catch any errors, the timesheet to be unlocked, you to make changes, and your internal coach to approve before the 8th. This is a lot that would need to happen in a short amount of time, and it relies on a lot of different people. Please help ensure your living allowance is never delayed and submit all of your timesheets on the Monday following the end of the pay period. Thank you in advance. You only need accompaniment documentation on your timesheets up until the date you receive an email telling you are no longer on accompaniment. After you are off accompaniment, the text box will no longer appear on your timesheets. Your internal coach or site supervisor will also be notified via email when your background checks are cleared. We usually receive background check results within 30 days of a member's start date. Let's review some best practices. Record accompaniment information on paper and keep it for your records. Always record the dates, times, and names of who accompanied you on your timesheets. Be sure to account for all hours served each day. Update this information in Encore regularly. Submit your timesheets on time, and don't forget to ask for help. If you have questions about anything covered in this training, please contact your program manager. Thank you for your time and for your service to our programs.